You've seen him, the man who refuses to apologize. Not because he's cruel, not because he's ignorant, but because he operates from a completely different understanding of power, truth, and human nature. Society calls him arrogant. Nietzsche would call him awake. Right now, you're probably thinking about someone like this. Maybe it's your boss who never says sorry even when he's clearly wrong. Maybe it's that friend who stands by his decisions without the performance of remorse everyone expects. Maybe, and this is what really bothers you, maybe it's you trying to break free from the chains of constant apology. Here's what Friedrich Nietzsche understood that modern society desperately tries to hide from you. The demand for apology isn't about healing, reconciliation, or growth. It's about control. It's about forcing someone to submit, to bow, to admit that your reality is more valid than theirs. And the man who refuses this ritual, he's not being difficult. He's refusing to participate in a power game disguised as morality. Think about the last time someone demanded an apology from you. Really think about it. Were they genuinely hurt and seeking understanding? Or were they trying to make you bend, to force you into a position of inferiority, to extract from you a public admission that you were wrong and they were right? Nietzsche wrote, "I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on I can't believe you." But modern society has twisted this into something else entirely. We've created a culture where apologizing has nothing to do with genuine remorse and everything to do with social performance. And the man who sees through this performance, who refuses to play the game, becomes society's greatest threat. Because if he can stand firm without apologizing, what does that say about everyone else who constantly bends the knee? What does that reveal about the entire social structure built on forced submission disguised as politeness? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will change how you see every interaction, every conflict, every moment when society demands you bow down and say you're sorry. Nietzsche understood something fundamental about human nature that most people never grasp. Morality isn't universal. It's a weapon. He divided humanity into two categories: master morality and slave morality. And the difference between them explains everything about why the man who doesn't apologize terrifies everyone around him. Master morality creates its own values. The man operating from this framework decides for himself what's good and bad, based on what enhances life, power, and authentic expression. He doesn't need external validation to know if his actions were right or wrong. He has an internal compass that guides him. Slave morality, on the other hand, is reactive. It's built on ressentiment, that deep, festering resentment of those who feel powerless. And slave morality's greatest weapon is guilt, the ability to make others feel bad, to force them to apologize, to extract submission through moral pressure. Watch what happens in any social conflict. The person demanding an apology isn't usually the one who was most hurt. They're the one who wants to establish dominance. They want you on your knees, metaphorically speaking, admitting they were right and you were wrong. The apology isn't about healing the relationship. It's about winning the power struggle. Nietzsche wrote, "The noble type of man experiences itself as determining values, but the slave type experiences itself as needing others to validate its values." So when you refuse to apologize, you're not just refusing to say sorry. You're refusing to let someone else determine your values. You're refusing to submit to their interpretation of reality. You're maintaining your sovereignty over your own judgment. And that's terrifying to people who've built their entire sense of power on making others apologize. Think about how society conditions you from childhood. When two kids fight, adults don't actually care about what happened. They just want both kids to apologize to restore order. The truth doesn't matter. Understanding doesn't matter. What matters is compliance. Both children learn the same lesson. Your actual experience is irrelevant. Performing apology is what's required for social acceptance. This conditioning continues into adulthood. You're expected to apologize to keep your job, even when your boss is wrong. You're expected to apologize to maintain relationships, even when you did nothing wrong. You're expected to apologize to avoid conflict, even when conflict might lead to necessary truth. The man who refuses this conditioning hasn't failed to learn social rules. He's transcended them. He's operating from what Nietzsche called beyond good and evil. a framework where actions aren't judged by social consensus, but by their relationship to life, truth, and power. Here's what makes this so dangerous to the social order. If one man can refuse to apologize and survive, even thrive, then the entire system of social control through guilt starts to crumble. Because the system depends on everyone's compliance. It depends on everyone agreeing that apology equals submission, and submission equals social harmony. But Nietzsche asked a different question. What if social harmony built on forced submission isn't actually harmony? What if it's just coordinated cowardice? The man who doesn't apologize forces everyone around him to confront this question, and they hate him for it. Not because he's wrong, but because he's revealing an uncomfortable truth about how society actually functions. Let me show you exactly how this plays out in real interactions, because understanding the mechanics of this power dynamic will change everything about how you navigate conflict. Every demand for apology follows the same pattern. Someone claims to be hurt or offended. They make their emotional state your responsibility. They imply or directly state that you must apologize to fix what you broke. And here's the trap. The moment you apologize, you've accepted their entire framework. You've agreed that their interpretation of events is correct. You've admitted that their emotional reaction is your fault. You've submitted to their judgment of your character and actions. The man who refuses to apologize isn't denying that the other person feels hurt. He's refusing to accept responsibility for feelings he didn't create. He's refusing to validate an interpretation of events he doesn't agree with. He's refusing to submit to a judgment he doesn't accept. Nietzsche wrote, "There are no facts, only interpretations. In any conflict, you have your interpretation and they have theirs. When you apologize, you're not acknowledging objective wrongdoing. You're accepting their interpretation as more valid than yours. And once you understand this, you realize that most apologies are acts of self-betrayal. You're betraying your own perception of reality to purchase temporary social peace." The man who sees this clearly can't participate in the ritual anymore. Not because he's stubborn, but because he values truth over comfort. Because he values self-respect over social approval. Because he understands that genuine relationships can't be built on forced submission. Watch how people react when you refuse to apologize. They don't try to understand your perspective. They escalate. They make bigger demands. They recruit others to pressure you. They threaten consequences. Why? Because your refusal to submit threatens the entire social hierarchy they've built their identity around. If you can refuse and survive, what does that say about everyone who constantly apologizes? It says they're choosing submission. It says they're prioritizing social acceptance over self-respect. It says they're living in what Nietzsche called bad faith, pretending they have no choice when they actually do. This is why the man who doesn't apologize must be punished, ostracized, labeled as arrogant or toxic or narcissistic. Because if society acknowledged he might be right, the entire structure of social control would collapse. Here's the really dark part that nobody talks about. The people most offended by the man who won't apologize are usually the people who apologize most frequently themselves. They've sacrificed their sovereignty so many times that seeing someone refuse to sacrifice his enrages them. It's not about the specific situation. It's about what his refusal represents. His freedom highlights their bondage. His authenticity highlights their performance. His strength highlights their weakness. And they can't forgive him for it. Nietzsche had a concept that perfectly explains this dynamic. He called it the will to power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. The ability to live according to your own values, make your own judgments, and stand by your decisions without needing external validation. Every human being has this will to power, but most people sublimate it, redirect it, deny it. They pretend they're being humble when they're actually being cowardly. They pretend they're being kind when they're actually being weak. The man who doesn't apologize hasn't sublimated his will to power. He's channeling it directly into maintaining sovereignty over his own life, his own decisions, his own interpretations of reality. This makes him dangerous because power is always a zero-sum game in human relationships. When he maintains his power by refusing to submit, everyone else feels less powerful by comparison. Think about your workplace. The person who never apologizes, how is he treated? If he's competent, if he delivers results, If he's genuinely valuable, something interesting happens. People fear him, but they also respect him. They might not like him, but they treat him differently than they treat the people who constantly apologize. Why? Because he's demonstrated that social pressure doesn't control him, that guilt doesn't manipulate him, that their disapproval doesn't diminish him. He's shown that he values his own judgment more than their approval, and in doing so, he's claimed a kind of power that most people surrender before they even enter the room. Nietzsche wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe." The demand for apology is one of the tribe's most effective tools for overwhelming individuals. When you refuse to apologize, you're not just refusing to say words, you're refusing to be overwhelmed. You're asserting your individuality against the collective pressure to conform. But here's where it gets complex, and this is crucial to understand. The man who never apologizes isn't the same as the man who's never wrong. The distinction matters because Nietzsche wasn't advocating for blind stubbornness. He was advocating for authentic strength. There's a massive difference between the man who doesn't apologize because he's operating from strength and the man who doesn't apologize because he's operating from weakness. The weak man refuses to apologize because apologizing would shatter his fragile ego. His refusal comes from insecurity, from the fear that admitting any mistake would prove he's as worthless as he secretly believes himself to be. The strong man refuses to apologize when apology would be self-betrayal, when it would validate a false interpretation of reality, when it would submit to judgment he doesn't accept. But the strong man also doesn't need the performance of refusal. Nietzsche distinguished between strength and mere reaction. The reactive person is controlled by what they're reacting against. The strong person acts from their own nature, their own values, their own understanding. So the truly powerful man who doesn't apologize isn't thinking about apology at all. He's not refusing as an act of defiance. He's simply operating from a framework where forced apology doesn't exist as a category. He might acknowledge when he's made a mistake, when he's caused unintended harm, when his actions didn't align with his own values. But this acknowledgement comes from within, from his own judgment, not from external pressure demanding submission. This is what terrifies people most. They can't manipulate him. Guilt doesn't work on him. Social pressure doesn't move him. Threats of rejection don't control him. He's psychologically free in a way that makes everyone else's bondage visible. Think about the last time you genuinely made a mistake that violated your own values. Did you need someone to demand an apology? Or did you naturally want to make it right because the action didn't align with who you are? The man operating from master morality doesn't need external pressure to correct course. He has internal standards that are often higher than social standards, but those standards are his own, not inherited from society, not imposed by others, not accepted because everyone else accepts them. This is Nietzsche's concept of becoming who you are, creating your own values, living by your own standards, judging yourself by your own measures. And when you've done this, when you've truly internalized your own value system, other people's demands for apology become irrelevant. Not because you're callous, but because you're operating from a different framework entirely. Watch how this plays out in relationships. The woman who demands constant apologies from her partner isn't actually seeking understanding or growth. She's seeking submission. She's testing whether she can control his reality through emotional pressure. The man who apologizes constantly isn't being loving or considerate. He's being weak. He's purchasing temporary peace by betraying his own perception of reality. But the man who refuses to apologize unless he genuinely believes he's violated his own standards, he forces a different kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than one person's dominance over the other, one based on genuine communication rather than ritual submission, one based on two whole people choosing each other rather than one person controlling another. Nietzsche wrote about the eternal recurrence, the idea of living your life as if you'd have to repeat it exactly forever. Would you choose a life of constant apology, constant submission, constant betrayal of your own perception for social peace? Or would you choose a life of standing firm in your truth, even when it costs you relationships, opportunities, social acceptance? The man who doesn't apologize has already answered this question. He's chosen authenticity over acceptance, sovereignty over submission, truth over tranquility. And that choice, that's what makes him terrifying. Because he's living proof that the choice exists, that you don't have to participate in the social games of guilt and apology, that you can refuse the entire framework and not only survive, but thrive. Here's what changes when you understand this. You stop seeing apology as a moral virtue and start seeing it as a tool. Sometimes useful, sometimes manipulative, always political. You stop feeling guilty when you refuse to apologize for things you don't actually regret. You start evaluating each situation based on your own judgment rather than social pressure. But there's a dark side to this freedom that Nietzsche never shied away from addressing. The man who refuses to apologize walks a lonely path. Not because he's unlikable, but because most people can't handle someone who won't submit. Your friendships will change. People who needed you to be weak, who needed to feel superior through making you apologize, will disappear from your life. Your romantic relationships will transform. Partners who wanted control through guilt will leave. Only people secure enough to relate to an equal will remain. Your career might take unexpected turns. Bosses who rule through intimidation will see you as a threat. Colleagues who bonded through shared submission will exclude you. This is the price of sovereignty. This is the cost of refusing to let others control you through guilt. Nietzsche called this the pathos of distance, the necessary separation between those who create their own values and those who accept values from others. The man who doesn't apologize increases this distance with every refusal to submit. But here's what he gains in return: genuine relationships with people who respect strength rather than exploit weakness. Professional relationships based on competence rather than dominance games. A sense of self that doesn't depend on external validation. The ability to look in the mirror and recognize the person staring back. Nietzsche wrote, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." Every time you refuse an unjust demand for apology, you become stronger. Every time you stand firm in your own judgment despite social pressure, you become more yourself. Every time you choose authenticity over acceptance, you move closer to what Nietzsche called the Übermensch, the person who creates their own values rather than inheriting them. Let me be clear about something crucial. This isn't about being an asshole. This isn't about refusing accountability. This isn't about treating others poorly and hiding behind philosophy. The man who doesn't apologize according to Nietzsche's framework is actually more accountable, not less. He's accountable to his own standards, which are often higher than social standards. He's accountable to truth, which is more demanding than social performance. He's accountable to his own judgment, which can't be manipulated or bargained with. What he's not accountable to is other people's interpretations of reality, other people's attempts to control him through guilt, other people's demands that he submit to their judgment. This distinction matters because society will try to label the man who doesn't apologize as narcissistic, toxic, abusive. And sometimes that label is accurate. The weak man hiding behind refusal is those things. But the strong man operating from sovereignty is none of those things. He's simply free in a way that threatens every system of control. Here's how to tell the difference. The weak man who won't apologize makes everything about himself, can't acknowledge any perspective but his own, uses his refusal to apologize as a weapon to hurt others. The strong man who won't apologize can acknowledge other perspectives without submitting to them, genuinely considers whether his actions aligned with his values, refuses apology only when it would validate a false interpretation of reality. One is defensive, the other is sovereign. One is reaction, the other is action. One is controlled by what he's against, the other is guided by what he's for. Nietzsche's final insight about apology connects to his concept of amor fati, love of fate. The man who truly doesn't apologize has reached a point where he loves his choices, his path, his consequences. He doesn't regret in the way most people regret, because regret implies you would change the past if you could. But if you truly lived according to your own values, made decisions based on your own judgment, acted from your own nature, then changing the past would mean betraying who you are. This is the ultimate freedom. Not the freedom from consequences, but the freedom to accept consequences of choices you genuinely made, not choices society pressured you into. Not choices you made to avoid conflict, but choices that reflected your authentic values. When you reach this state, apology becomes irrelevant. Not because you never make mistakes, but because when you do make mistakes according to your own standards, you naturally correct them. Not because someone demanded it, but because living according to your values requires it. And when others demand apology for things that don't violate your standards, their demands have no power over you. You're psychologically free in a way that most people can't even imagine. This is why the man who doesn't apologize terrifies everyone. He's living proof that the entire social system of control through guilt is optional, that you can refuse to participate and not only survive but flourish. That authenticity is more powerful than acceptance. That self-respect is more valuable than social approval. That sovereignty is worth any price society might demand. The question isn't whether you should never apologize. The question is whether your apologies come from genuine internal alignment or external pressure. Whether you're living according to your own values or performing for others. Whether you're free or just pretending to be. Nietzsche spent his life becoming free. Society called him mad, isolated him, dismissed his ideas, but his philosophy outlived his critics. His ideas changed the world. His refusal to submit to prevailing values created new possibilities for everyone who came after. The man who doesn't apologize today is following the same path. Society will call him arrogant, difficult, toxic, but he's not concerned with society's labels. He's concerned with living authentically, creating his own values, maintaining sovereignty over his own life. And that choice, that refusal to submit, that commitment to authenticity, that's what makes him both terrifying and magnificent. Because he's showing you what's possible when you stop apologizing for being exactly who you are. Write in the comments, "I bow to no one." Show that you understand the difference between arrogance and sovereignty, between stubbornness and strength, between refusing accountability and refusing submission. You've just consumed philosophy that most people will never encounter. Ideas that challenge the foundation of social control that governs most human interaction. Tap that subscribe button because you're ready for more truth that society doesn't want you to hear. You're someone who values authenticity over acceptance, who chooses freedom over comfort, who understands that real power comes from within, not from making others submit. Hit the like button because this video challenged something deep in you. It made you question whether your apologies have been genuine or coerced, whether you've been living authentically or performing for approval, whether you're free or just comfortable in your chains. That questioning is the first step toward genuine sovereignty. What's coming next will push even further into territory that society guards most carefully. The philosophers decoded every system of control, revealed every manipulation, exposed every comfortable lie, and I'm bringing all of it to you, piece by piece, idea by idea. Stay subscribed, stay sovereign, stay awake, because once you see how the game is played, you can never be played again, and the journey into genuine freedom has only just begun.